They say a dog's bark is just noise until you learn to listen. But that night in a small-town police station tucked behind Main Street's flickering streetlights, one bark shattered the silence like a gunshot in a church. Storm, the department's K9, wasn't barking at shadows or chasing his tail. He was standing on the desk, yes, standing, with his front paws planted squarely on the keyboard, his deep, booming bark echoing off the walls like a siren in the dead of night. Officer Mike. Dawson jolted upright. The report he'd been typing knocked sideways as Storm's weight shook the table. Papers scattered, coffee sloshed dangerously close to the laptop, and for a split second Mike froze, staring at the big German shepherd like he'd lost his mind. But Storm wasn't looking at Mike. His eyes, sharp, golden, and glinting with something that felt too much like urgency, were locked on the computer screen. "Storm down, what's gotten into you, buddy?" Mike's voice cracked somewhere between a command and a plea. The station was quiet that night, only the soft buzz of the vending machine and the distant creak of the old HVAC system filling the void. But Storm's bark cut through it all, relentless, almost desperate. It wasn't the bark of a dog wanting a treat or a walk. It was the bark of a soldier on the front line, warning of something dark, something close. Mike's heart kicked up, a notch, a tightness creeping into his chest. He reached for Storm's collar, but the dog shifted, paws tapping frantically across the keyboard. And then, with a single press, whether by accident or instinct, Storm hit the space bar. The laptop's screen flickered and a file popped open. Mike squinted at the title. Voice log. Unknown. MP3. What the hell? He hesitated, mouse hovering over the play button, the hairs on his arms standing up. Storm sat back on his haunches, his breathing steady but intense, eyes never leaving the screen. Mike glanced at the time, 2:17 a.m. He should have been halfway through that report on a stolen truck, but suddenly, none of that mattered. With a deep breath, he clicked play. A voice crackled through the speakers, low, scratchy, barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I got the money. Drop it at the usual spot, no more screw-ups or we're both toast." Mike's blood ran cold. That voice, it was familiar. Too familiar. His stomach clenched. Was that? Before he could finish the thought, Storm let out another sharp bark and turned his head sharply toward the door leading to the back offices. His ears perked up, muscles tense like a coiled spring. Mike's gut told him to follow Storm's lead, but logic screamed at him. This was crazy. A barking dog, a random file. He was probably just tired. Stress could mess with your head, right? But then again, Storm wasn't just any dog. Storm had been his partner for 4 years. Together, they'd taken down drug dealers, found missing kids, and once even saved a woman trapped in a flipped car during a flood. Mike trusted Storm with his life, and right now Storm was telling him something was wrong, dead wrong. Mike's hand trembled as he clicked through the file properties. It had been saved 2 days ago, on his computer. His computer. He felt a knot form in his throat, sweat prickling, at the back of his neck. Storm's tail thumped once against the floor like a silent drumbeat urging him forward. Mike closed the laptop, heart pounding, and stared at his partner. "All right, Storm," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see what else you're trying to tell me. By the way, if you're into stories about real heroes on 4 legs, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals. We bring you true stories of incredible animal rescues and the bonds that change lives. Hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what happens next." Mike stood up, adjusting his duty belt, feeling the weight of his badge like a stone. He followed Storm's gaze to the far side of the room, the file cabinet, the printer, the cheap plastic coffee maker that hadn't worked right in months. Storm sniffed the air, his nose twitching. He moved toward the desk in the corner, Lieutenant Harris's desk. Storm stopped, stared, then let out a soft, low growl. It wasn't loud, but it was a sound Mike had heard before, usually right before. Storm lunged at a suspect. Mike's pulse raced. Harris was the lieutenant, a stand-up guy, a 30-year veteran, a mentor to a lot of rookies. No way he was involved in whatever this was. right? Storm nudged the bottom drawer of Harris's desk with his nose, pawing at it insistently. Mike hesitated, then crouched down and pulled the handle. It slid open smoothly, revealing a mess of papers, pens, and a half-empty bag of beef jerky. But, tucked beneath it all, wedged between a binder and a crumpled pack of gum, was a folded piece of paper. Mike unfolded it, hands shaking. It was a list of names, 10 names, and next to each name a date and a number. The top of the page read, "Confirmed. Payment received." Mike's stomach twisted. These were officers. He recognized at least half. The names. And the dates. They matched up with the night Storm had been restless, barking at nothing, staring at doors like he was watching ghosts. Storm sat down, tail thumping once, as if to say, "I told you." Mike didn't know what scared him more, the possibility that Harris, his lieutenant, was dirty, or the realization that Storm had known all along. He looked down at the dog, who stared back with eyes that seemed almost human. Mike swallowed, hard, a lump forming in his throat. "What the hell are we into, buddy?" Storm didn't answer, of course. He just sat there waiting, watching, and Mike had the sickening feeling that this was only the beginning. The weight of the discovery pressed down on Mike's chest like a cinder block. He sat there, paper in hand, the names burning into his eyes. Each name was a cop, his colleagues, his friends. Some had been at his own barbecue last month, flipping burgers and laughing like they had nothing to hide. Storm shifted at his side, his tail flicking across the floor in short, tense strokes. His ears were still perked, eyes darting between the desk and the hallway like he expected someone to burst in at any moment. Mike swallowed hard, forcing the bile back down. He folded the paper, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and glanced at Storm. "All right, boy, looks like we're in this together." Storm let out a soft chuff, almost like an acknowledgement. Mike rubbed the dog's head, but his mind was racing. What the hell was going on? Was Harris, their lieutenant, running some kind of payoff scheme? And those voices in the recording, was that him talking about the drop-off? Mike wasn't sure what scared him more, the possibility that Harris was dirty, or the fact that Storm had been onto it before any of them. He stood up, scanning the quiet station. The place felt different now. Not just an office, but a trap. The hum of the vending machine, the distant rattle of the air vents, even the glow of the computer screens, all of it felt sinister, like eyes watching from the walls. He needed answers, but he also needed a plan. Storm nudged his leg, breaking his spiral of thought. Mike glanced down, and Storm's gaze locked onto the back hallway, the one that led to the evidence room and Harris's office. Mike felt a chill run down his spine. The evidence room. If Harris was up to something shady, maybe that's where the real dirt was buried. And Storm seemed to know it. "All right, let's check it out." "Quietly," Mike whispered, as if the walls had ears. They moved down the dim hallway, Storm leading with his nose low to the ground, every muscle in his body tense and alert. The station smelled of stale coffee, floor cleaner, and something else. Something faint, metallic, sharp. The scent of trouble. As they reached the evidence room, Mike's hand hovered over the doorknob. He paused, listening. Silence, except for Storm's steady breathing and the faint hum of the building's old heating system. He tried the knob. Locked. Of course. Mike glanced down at Storm, who sat back, tail thumping once. The dog's nose twitched, his gaze fixed on the door like he could see straight through it. Mike sighed. "Guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way." He fished his keys from his belt, slipping the evidence room key into the lock. The tumblers clicked, a sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. He cracked the door open and peeked inside. The room was dark, lit only by the faint green glow of a computer monitor in sleep mode. Rows of shelves stretched out in neat, lifeless lines filled with boxes, bags, and plastic bins tagged with case numbers. Storm moved in first, his paws silent against the floor. Mike followed, his flashlight sweeping across the shelves. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but Storm had a way of finding what mattered. Sure enough, Storm's nose twitched as he walked past the shelves, once, twice, then stopped dead in his tracks. He sniffed at a low shelf, tail stiff, then barked once, sharp and short. Mike flinched. "Shh, easy boy," Mike whispered, heart pounding. He squatted down, brushing past a few boxes. His flashlight caught on a brown evidence bag tucked in the back. He pulled it out, squinting at the label. Case 4567, narcotic seizure, March 12th. That was months ago. Mike opened the bag and frowned. Inside, instead of the usual cataloged drugs or paraphernalia, there was an unmarked burner phone. It felt wrong, too clean, too deliberate. He powered it on. A string of text messages popped up. Mike scrolled, his throat tightening with every word. They were coded, sure, but the context was clear. Meetups, times, drop locations, and names. One of them matched the list in his pocket. Storm let out a low growl, his hackles rising. Mike looked up just in time to hear a faint creak from the hallway. Someone was coming. Mike snapped the phone off, stuffed it in his jacket, and clicked off his flashlight. Storm melted into the shadows, silent as smoke, his body coiled and ready. Mike's own breath was shallow, pulse hammering in his ears. The footsteps were slow, measured. Mike's gut twisted. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were looking for something or someone. A voice, low and muttering, drifted in. "Thought I heard something." It was Harris. Mike's heart plummeted. The man's silhouette darkened the doorway, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark like a knife. Mike could see the glint of his badge, the casual grip on his hip where his sidearm rested. Harris scanned the room, stepping in cautiously. Storm tensed, his ears flat against his skull. Mike could feel the dog's energy, like a live wire thrumming through the air. Harris's light passed inches from them. Mike held his breath, barely daring to move. "Must be the damn vents again," Harris muttered, turning away. Mike exhaled, slowly, relief washing over him, but only for a moment. Because as Harris's flashlight moved, it glinted off the corner of the evidence bag Mike had just disturbed. Harris paused. Mike's stomach dropped. Storm shifted beside him, poised like a spring. This wasn't over. Not even close. Mike barely dared to breathe. The faint shuffle of Harris's boots on the linoleum echoed like a drum in the dead-still evidence room. The lieutenant's flashlight hovered over the shelves, pausing dangerously close to the bag Mike had just rifled through. Storm, still as a statue, sat pressed against Mike's leg, his ears flat, his muscles wound tight as a coiled spring. Mike's mind raced. He could feel the cold sweat trickling down his back, the hammering of his pulse in his ears. He knew this feeling. It was the same sharp-edged awareness he'd had kicking indoors with Storm by his side, chasing down drug dealers or missing kids. Except this time, it wasn't a criminal on the other side of the door. It was his own boss. And if Harris caught him here, God, he didn't even know what would happen. Harris grunted softly, muttering to himself, and took a step back, the beam of his flashlight swinging wide. The man's silhouette disappeared through the crack of the doorway, and Mike heard the faint sound of retreating footsteps fading down the hall. He waited. 5 seconds. 10. He exhaled, shaky and shallow, then looked at Storm, whose gaze stayed, fixed on the door like he was waiting for a sign. "Good boy," Mike whispered, barely audible. "You're a damn hero." Storm's tail thumped once softly as if to say, "Yeah, I know." Mike's hands trembled as he pocketed the burner phone. He didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went, but the sick feeling in his gut told him it was a hell of a lot bigger than a few dirty payoffs. He had to get out. Now. Mike eased the door shut behind him, locking it back into place, and moved quickly down the hallway, Storm gliding at his side like a shadow. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the vending machine in the break room felt amplified in his head. The station wasn't a home anymore. It felt like enemy territory. When they got back to Mike's desk, Storm hopped up onto the chair like he owned it. His tail curled tight against his body, but his eyes stayed locked on Mike, waiting. Mike sat down hard, his hands shaking as he opened his laptop. He had the burner phone, the names, and the recording Storm had uncovered earlier. But how the hell was he supposed to handle this? He wasn't some hotshot detective in a TV show. He was a patrol officer in a small town in Texas, with a mortgage, a beat-up truck, and a dog who'd apparently just blown open the lid on a major corruption case. His stomach twisted. Who could? Hey, trust not Harris. Maybe not anyone in the department. Storm let out a low, grumbling woof, breaking the silence. Mike glanced at him. Storm's ears were up again, head tilted slightly, the way he always looked when he smelled something off. His gaze shifted toward the window as if he could see straight through the blinds into the dark parking lot beyond. Mike frowned. He stood, walked over, and peeked out. The lot was nearly empty except for his truck and the usual beaters from the night shift. But at the far end, near the back fence, a pair of headlights flickered once, briefly, then cut out. Storm let out a single low growl, like a warning. Mike's heart kicked up. That wasn't normal. He turned back to the computer, opening a browser and searching for something, anything on the case numbers tied to the burner phone. Most were dead ends, old files buried deep in the system, but a few popped up as active investigations. Drug cases, weapons seizures, things that could be worth a lot of money to the wrong people. Storm hopped down and padded over to the door, sniffing at the crack along the bottom. His tail stiffened, and Mike knew that look. Someone was coming. His gut twisted. He grabbed the burner phone, the paper with the names, and shoved them deep into his jacket. He glanced at Storm. "All right, partner," he muttered, voice tight. "Let's roll." They moved quickly, slipping out the back door into the cool night air. The parking lot stretched wide under the dim glow of the streetlights, a patchwork of cracked asphalt and oil stains. Storm stayed glued to Mike's side, his head low, his ears twitching like radar dishes. Mike's truck was parked a few spaces down, keys in his pocket. He had just reached for them when a low voice called out behind him. "Going somewhere, Dawson?" Mike froze. The voice was smooth, calm, but the kind of calm that made your skin crawl. Slowly, he turned, and there stood Harris, arms crossed, his badge glinting in the faint light. Behind him, two other officers loomed, Sanders and Ortiz. Both were big guys, the kind who always seemed to hang around the edges of trouble but never got their hands dirty. Until now. Mike felt Storm's body tense, his fur bristling, a low, steady growl vibrating in his chest. Harris smirked, his tone casual like they were talking about the weather. "You've been busy tonight. Found anything interesting?" Mike's throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to lie, to bluff, but Storm's growl deepened, almost like he was saying, "Don't you dare." Mike's jaw tightened. "Just tying up some loose ends, you know how it is." Harris took a step closer, and the other two flanked him like bookends. "Funny," he said, voice dropping, "because I think you've been poking your nose where it doesn't belong." Storm let out a sharp bark, stepping forward, hackles raised. His teeth flashed in the dim light, and for a split second Harris's cool facade slipped. Just a flicker, but Mike saw it. "Easy, boy," Harris muttered, but his hand drifted toward his belt just inches from his gun. Mike swallowed hard, adrenaline surging. He couldn't win this, not here, not now, not 3-on-1. But he had Storm, and Storm didn't back down from bullies. Mike's voice came out rough, edged with steel. "We're done here, Harris." He started to back away, Storm moving with him step for step. Harris's smirk twisted into something darker. "Oh, we're far from done, Dawson." As Mike reached his truck, Storm leapt into the passenger seat in one fluid motion. Mike fired the engine, tires crunching on the gravel as he pulled out fast, heart slamming in his chest. In the rear view, he saw Harris standing in the lot, arms crossed, watching them go, his face a mask of calm, but his eyes cold as a snake's. Storm sat rigid beside him, staring straight ahead, his body a tight coil of muscle and instinct. Mike's hands gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. He didn't know where they were going, just that they had to get out, had to stay ahead, had to stay alive. "Good boy, Storm," he whispered, voice shaking. "Good boy." But Storm didn't relax. He just kept staring, like he knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Mike's truck tore through the quiet streets, tires humming across the asphalt like a heartbeat pounding in his ears. Streetlights flickered past, throwing long shadows over cracked sidewalks and empty porches. Storm sat rigid in the passenger seat, head low, ears up, his dark eyes darting between Mike and the side mirrors. Mike's hands gripped the wheel so tight it felt like the plastic might crack under the strain. His heart hadn't stopped hammering since they left the station, and his mind raced, spinning through the names on that list, the burner phone in his pocket, the cold stare of Lieutenant Harris. What the hell did I just get myself into? He couldn't go home. That was the first rule, when things went sideways. If Harris knew Mike was onto him, then his house wasn't safe. Hell, nowhere in town felt safe now. Every familiar street, every friendly face, it all felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. Storm let out a low, rumbling growl, breaking the silence. Mike glanced over at him, his partner's fur bristling in the dim glow of the dashboard. The dog's body was coiled, muscles tight like a spring, eyes sharp and alert. Mike knew that look. Storm wasn't just reacting to the adrenaline. He sensed something. Maybe it was Harris, or maybe it was the weight of what they were up against. But whatever it was, Storm was ready. Mike took a breath and made a decision. If they couldn't go home, they needed a place to regroup, a place Harris wouldn't think to look. He turned the truck sharply, tires squealing, and headed out of town toward the edge of the county. A half hour later, they pulled into the gravel driveway of an old hunting cabin. It belonged to an old friend of his dad's, long since passed, but the key still hung from a nail under the porch. It was the kind of place nobody thought about unless they had a reason to, just the kind of forgotten corner Mike needed. He killed the headlights and sat there in the dark for a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The woods pressed in around them, heavy and still, the moonlight barely filtering through the trees. Storm let out a soft chuff, breaking the tension. Mike glanced over, the dog's eyes catching the moonlight, glinting like twin coals. "All right, partner," Mike whispered. "Let's figure this out." They stepped inside, the cabin creaking underfoot. The air smelled like old wood and dust, the scent of a place long abandoned. Mike flipped on a small lamp, its yellow glow barely enough to push back the darkness. Storm sniffed the floor, then the corners, then settled by the door, ears twitching, ever the sentinel. Mike sat at the small table, spreading out the burner phone, the list of names, and the folded paper from Harris's desk. His mind spun in circles, connecting dots he wasn't sure fit. 10 names, officers, cases tied to drug busts and weapon seizures, payoffs, drop-offs. Harris at the center of it all, cool as a cucumber, acting like nothing was wrong. And him, Mike Dawson, just a beat cop who stumbled into the wrong file at the wrong time. Storm shifted, letting out a soft, warning growl. Mike tensed, listening. The woods were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath. He turned back to the table, but his gut twisted. This wasn't going away. They were in it now, and the walls were closing in. Storm stood up suddenly, ears pinned forward, body stiff. He was staring at the window, the one overlooking the gravel drive. Mike's stomach dropped. Headlights. A pair of them, bouncing down the dirt road, cutting through the trees like searchlights. "Damn it," Mike muttered, heart racing. His hand shot to the burner phone, shoving it into his pocket. He grabbed the list of names, crumpling it tight, and reached for Storm's leash. But Storm was already moving, low to the ground, his paws silent against the wooden floor. Mike followed, killing the lamp. Darkness swallowed the cabin, but the headlights kept getting closer, brighter, their beams sweeping across the porch like a hunter's spotlight. They weren't here by accident. Mike crouched by the window, peeking through the crack in the curtains. A black SUV rolled to a stop outside, engine idling. The windows were tinted, but Mike's gut twisted in recognition. It was the same SUV Harris had used when he ran off-site. "Meetings," Storm growled, a low, steady sound like a warning bell in the night. Mike's breath caught. He had a choice. Hide and pray they didn't check the cabin or run. Storm glanced at him, and in that split second, Mike knew there was no hiding. They had to go. He opened the back door, moving quick and quiet, Storm slipping out ahead of him, into the night. They crept along the side of the cabin, hearts thudding in sync. The woods stretched out beyond the clearing, dark and tangled but full of shadows they could melt into. Behind them, the SUV doors opened. Heavy boots hit the ground, and voices drifted through the night air, low, sharp, familiar. Check inside. Fast. Mike's breath froze in his lungs. He could feel Storm pressed against his leg, ready to launch. They slipped into the tree line just as a flashlight beam swept across the porch. Clear, one voice muttered. Another voice, deeper, replied, "They were here. Find them." Storm's growl rumbled deep, vibrating through Mike's boots. The dog's muscles quivered, ready to strike, but Mike placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Not yet, boy. We're not done." They moved deeper into the woods, the sounds of boots and flashlight beams fading behind them. The night swallowed them up, the trees their only cover. Mike's breath was ragged, his mind spinning. Storm stayed close, his presence a steady, grounding force. For the first time in his career, Mike realized he wasn't the one leading this case. Storm was. Storm had been the first to notice something was off. The first to bark, to growl, to guide him toward the files, the burner phone, the truth. Mike swallowed hard, heart pounding, and whispered into the dark, "You knew, didn't you, boy? You knew all along." Storm didn't answer, of course. He just pressed on, leading the way through the dark woods, every sense on high alert. And behind them, in the cabin they'd left behind, the men who were supposed to have Mike's back were tearing the place apart. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was survival. And Mike had never been more grateful to have Storm by his side. Mike's boots sank into the damp earth, each step leaving a print in the soft soil beneath the thick tangle of trees. Branches scraped his jacket as he pushed through the brush, Storm at his side, silent, focused, every muscle tight and ready. The cold night air bit at his face, but it was the knot in his gut that kept his breath short and his mind sharp. They'd been running for what felt like an hour, deeper into the woods, further from the cabin, and from the men who'd been sent to find them. Storm's tail flicked once and he paused, nose lifted to the wind. Mike crouched beside him, placing a hand on the dog's flank. Storm's body vibrated with tension, ears twitching. Mike whispered, "What do you got, buddy?" Storm turned his head sharply, eyes flashing, and nudged forward. Mike followed, heart hammering. They were running out of places to go, and daylight was still hours away. His mind kept circling back to the same thought. I need help. We need backup. But who could he trust? The list of people he couldn't trust was longer than ever. The sound of a car engine in the distance snapped him back. He crouched lower, peeking through the trees. A black SUV crawled along the dirt road, headlights off, moving slow, deliberate. Harris's crew was still looking, sweeping the area like a pack of wolves. Storm let out a low growl deep in his chest. Mike gently tapped his collar. "Easy, boy." "Not yet." He watched the SUV fade into the distance, the hum of the engine swallowed by the night. The woods closed in around them again, quiet, except for the steady sound of their own breathing and the rustle of leaves beneath their feet. Mike's mind spun. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan, a real one, somewhere safe to regroup, someone who could help. And then a thought hit him like a freight train. Liz. He hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since the divorce got messy and they'd gone their separate ways. But if there was anyone who could help, it was Liz. She was smart, tough, and she worked as an investigator for the DA's office downtown. If anyone knew how to handle dirty cops, it was her. It was a long shot, but right now, it was the only shot. Mike pulled out his burner phone, powered it on, and scrolled through the contacts. The names on the screen made his stomach churn, each one a ghost from the files he'd dug up. But Liz's number wasn't there. Of course not. This wasn't his personal phone. He clenched his jaw, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He couldn't call her. He'd have to find her in person. "All right, Storm," he muttered. "We're going back to town." Storm's ears flicked. But he didn't protest. He just fell into step beside Mike, silent and steady like he always did. They hiked for another hour, circling wide around the cabin and the road, keeping to the shadows. When they finally hit the outskirts of town, the sky was starting to pale at the edges, a faint glow hinting at dawn. The streets were quiet, too quiet. Mike's truck was a no-go. It'd be flagged by now if Harris had any sense. So they stuck to alleys, cutting through backyards, moving fast but cautious. Mike's legs ached, and every sound made his nerves jump, but Storm never wavered. When they finally reached Liz's apartment building, Mike's breath caught in his throat. It was a modest brick complex a few blocks from the courthouse, the kind of place you don't look twice at unless you know someone who lives there. He hesitated outside the door, his pulse pounding. What was he going to say? "Hey, Liz, long time. No see. By the way, there's a conspiracy in the department and I'm probably a wanted man now. Can I crash on your couch?" Storm sat beside him, tail tapping once against the sidewalk like a nudge to get moving. Mike drew in a shaky breath and knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. A light flicked on in the window. A curtain shifted. The door cracked open and there she was, Liz, hair tousled, eyes sharp, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. The second she saw him, her expression snapped from groggy to wide-eyed alarm. "Mike? What the hell?" "Liz, please," he said, voice low and tight. "I don't have time to explain. I just need a place to lay low for a minute." Her eyes darted to Storm, who sat panting quietly, then back to Mike. Her face tightened, but she stepped aside. "Get in." Mike slipped inside, Storm close at his heels. The door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time all night, Mike felt like he could breathe, barely. Liz crossed her arms. "You look like hell." "Feels like it too. What's going on, Mike?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Where the hell did he even start? Storm let out a quiet huff and lay down by the door, eyes still locked on Mike, waiting. Mike ran a hand through his hair, then took a deep breath. "It's Harris and others. There's a list. Dirty money, fake cases, payoffs. Storm found it all. I didn't mean to drag you into this, but I didn't have anywhere else to go." Liz's face paled, her lips tightening into a thin line. For a long beat, she didn't say a word. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right. You're not staying long, but for now you can crash. Here." Mike sagged into the couch, the exhaustion hitting him like a brick wall. Storm lay down at his feet, his body pressed close. Liz paced, muttering under her breath. "You're in deep, Mike. You know that, right? If Harris is involved, this is bigger than you can handle alone." "I know. You need to take this. To someone. The feds, maybe." Mike shook his head. "I can't. Not yet. I need proof. Solid proof. Otherwise they'll spin it, make me look like the bad guy." Liz chewed her lip, thinking. Finally, she let out a sigh. "All right. Let's find that proof." Mike stared at her, hope flickering to life in the pit of his stomach. Storm let out a low, approving woof, as if he knew they'd just crossed a line. And there was no turning back. The morning sun filtered weakly through Liz's blinds, casting thin slats of light across the apartment's worn carpet. Mike sat hunched over the coffee table, papers spread around him like puzzle pieces, files, the burner phone, the list of names. Storm lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes tracked every move in the room, never fully relaxing. Liz paced behind them, clutching a steaming mug of coffee, her brow furrowed. "So, let me get this straight. Harris has been running some kind of dirty operation, laundering money through fake busts, setting up false cases, and now you're sitting on a pile of evidence that could blow this wide open?" Mike nodded, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "Yeah, that's the gist of it. And he's got goons out there hunting you down like you're the criminal." "Pretty much." Liz exhaled sharply. "Jesus, Mike. You always did know how to pick your battles." Storm's ears flicked, his head lifting as a car engine rumbled past the apartment. Mike's gut twisted, but the car kept moving, fading into the distance. "We can't sit on this forever," Liz said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You've got proof. We need to make a move. Mike looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. You think the DA will listen? Liz hesitated, her jaw tightening. If we bring this straight to the DA, Harris could shut it down before it even hits a file. We need someone who's clean, someone outside his circle. Storm let out a soft huff, as if agreeing. Mike's mind raced. They needed to move, now, before Harris found them. He reached down and scratched behind Storm's ears, the dog leaning into the touch like a silent promise. I've got your back. Liz tapped her phone. I know a guy, FBI contact. Been working on public corruption cases. He owes me a favor. I can make the call. Mike's stomach flipped. It felt like jumping off a cliff, but what choice did they have? He nodded. Do it. While Liz stepped into the kitchen to make the call, Mike leaned back, exhaling slowly. The weight of it all, the danger, the betrayal, the fear, it pressed. Down hard, but he felt Storm's steady presence at his side. The dog didn't flinch. He didn't question, he just was. And in that moment, Mike realized how much he owed this dog, not just for sniffing out the files or growling at the right moment, but for being there, always when no one else was. Liz came back a few minutes later, her face tight. We've got a meeting. 2 hours, off-site. He's willing to listen, but we've got to get there. Mike nodded, standing. Let's go. They loaded up quickly, Mike double-checking the files and the phone. Storm hopped into the back seat, sitting tall, eyes sharp, as ever. The drive out of town felt like a lifetime. Every car that passed made Mike's pulse jump. Every glance in the rearview mirror felt like a countdown ticking closer to disaster. They met Liz's contact, a tall, clean-cut agent named Daniel Reese, in a quiet diner off a rural highway. The kind of place with a flickering neon sign and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. Reese slid into the booth, his eyes sharp and wary. Liz did the talking. Mike let her lay it all out. Harris, the files, the burner phone, the names. Reese's expression stayed locked in neutral, but his eyes darted to the files, the phone, then to Storm, who sat at Mike's feet like a furry shadow of justice. After what felt like an eternity, Reese leaned back and nodded once. Okay, you've got something here, but if we do this, we do it by the book. Chain of custody, affidavits, warrants, the whole 9 yards. Otherwise, this falls apart in court, and Harris walks. Mike's jaw clenched. Whatever it takes. Reese's gaze flicked to Storm, then back to Mike. That dog of yours, he's part of this story too, isn't he? Mike smiled faintly, a flash of pride cutting through the tension. Storm's the reason I'm sitting here. He found the files. He kept us alive. Reese's lips twitched, almost a smile. Then he's coming with us when we bring this down. Storm's tail thumped once against the floor as if he understood. The next hours blurred into a whirlwind. Legal paperwork, statements, evidence cataloging. Reese's team moved fast, but the air stayed tight with tension. Everyone knew the clock was ticking. Then the call came in. A squad was en route to the station. Harris was still there. Mike's chest tightened. I need to be there, he said. Reese started to argue, but Mike cut him off, voice firm. Harris knows my face. He needs to see me walk through that door with Storm and know it's over. Reese held his gaze for a long beat, then nodded. All right, let's finish this. They rolled up to the station in a convoy, marked cars, unmarked cars, badges flashing. Storm leapt from the car, his body a coiled spring, his eyes locked on the front doors. Mike's boots hit the pavement hard. He walked up those steps, Storm at his side, heart pounding like a drumline in his chest. The doors swung open. Harris stood inside, flanked by a couple of his guys, arms crossed, a sneer curling his lips. Well, well, look who crawled back. Mike stared him down, voice low and steady. Game's over, Harris. Behind him, Reese stepped in, badge raised, voice like a gavel in a courtroom. Lieutenant Harris, you're under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Harris's sneer faltered. Storm growled low, a sound that rumbled through the floor like a warning shot. Harris's hands twitched toward his belt, but Storm lunged, fast, controlled, a flash of fur and muscle. His teeth clamped onto Harris's sleeve, holding him in place without breaking skin, the perfect takedown. Mike stepped in, cuffing Harris's hands behind his back. The station erupted into shouts, but Storm stayed locked on, his gaze sharp, his body tense, until Mike gave the release command. It was over. Later, as they sat in the back of the cruiser, Storm's head resting on Mike's lap, Mike scratched behind his ears and whispered, "We did it, buddy." Storm's tail wagged once, slow and steady. They had made it through the storm, together. Thank you for following this journey with us. It's been a story about loyalty, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. If you were in Mike's shoes, what would you have done differently? Let us know your thoughts. Your voice matters. We'll see you next time on Heroes for Animals.